And call up my slide set. There we go. And then I am going to just blow my slides up. So if that looks odd, if you could just let me know, Andrew, that'd be great.
No, it looks good.
Okay. Okay, so thank you, everybody. We're going to go ahead and get started this evening. We are going to be recording tonight's session for a couple of different purposes that I'll talk about as we go along. Andrew has agreed to speak on behalf of one of my nonprofits activities called the Impact Homelessness Project. And I'm going to talk a little bit about how that project, oopsie, there we go, how that project works. The agenda tonight is just, I'm going to spend about 5 minutes talking about the Homelessness Impact Project and about our speaking series that we're going to be titling Leverage Points. I want to acknowledge a few partners that have dialed in tonight and are with us from other areas of the outside of California or just in another county. And then we'll go into Andrew's presentation. And so Andrew has a set of slides. He has the early question and answer set that I've provided him. And after he finishes speaking, we will go ahead and do like another QA session as a follow-on. I just wanted to let people know that oftentimes if your Zoom is cutting in and out, I know mine is pretty bad where I live, that if I found if you turn off your camera and you turn off maybe your cell phone and your iPad and your iPod, it seems to stay connected a little bit better. I think we will mute everybody as Andrew begins to do his part of the presentation because we are recording. However, I am going to moderate and do questions for Andrew. I'll take those out of the chat if you want to keep dropping them in the chat. And then we'll try to get those covered during the Q&A session when he finishes his slides. We have a really broad variety of questions, and I'm not sure that we'll get to all of them this evening, but I have asked Andrew if he would be interested in presenting again before the end of the year, and he has agreed to that. So I'm really, really excited about that. And after we're finished tonight, I have a very simple, I'm gonna say simple follow-up survey, just for you all to be really frank with us about how this worked. If you got any value from tonight's presentation and how we might do better and what your primary topics of interest happen to be. And then the resources, which include my slide deck, Andrew's slide deck, a link to something that I'll be talking about throughout the presentation, and some information for Bill Barberg will be posted in a Google Drive link that I'll send out with the follow-up email. Okay, so don't ask, the recordings are all being done, and but I don't think they're going to record the chat. Is that right, Andrew? Doesn't recording just take the main visual? Okay.
Sorry, I was muted. Yeah, I don't think it records the chat.
Okay, good. Okay, so that's how we're going to roll tonight. We've planned 90 minutes. I think that at this time and in the middle of the week, that's probably enough. And then we'll look at our feedback from the survey and figure out how to go a little bit deeper in another session as a follow-on. Okay.
Thank you.
Okay. Yes, you're welcome. So I wanted to talk just a little bit about the Impact Homelessness Project and give everyone a little bit of introduction. I think a lot of folks who are on the attendee list tonight know my name is Teddie Pierce. I'm a resident of Sonoma County living in Windsor. I've been in custom software development for about 25 years. I hate to kind of put those number of years out, but I feel like I've earned some scars from that. We produced 2 commercial solutions. One was for the wine industry and one was for nonprofit donor tracking. As that kind of rolled along and things moved from desktop class database systems up to the web, I went to work for the local Sonoma County Community Development Commission in 2011, and I stayed 5 years as the HMIS administrator for the Continuum of Care. I'm doing consulting now, and since 2016, I've worked with a number of Continuum of Cares in counties, and just a few of those are Redding, Shasta, Butte County, Lake County, Riverside County, and Alameda County, which I've had a very nice contract for a couple of years. I'm still doing the same HMIS work, but I wanted to, we're focusing more on the enhancements that we feel will make our work a little bit more successful. And the first one is this Impact Homelessness Project is going to have 3 primary focus areas. One is that we want to enhance homeless service effectiveness through infrastructure development. So I know a lot of us are very concentrated on specialties like data and charting, continuum of care, policy, and facilitation, but we felt myself and my partners, of which there are a couple on the call tonight, felt that kind of gluing that together would be a little bit more effective for a continuum of cares to see progress. And that's why I was so excited about you, Andrew, being able to come on and speak.
Maybe you could help me out here. I can't hear anything.
Can you troubleshoot that, Andrew?
Yeah, I didn't catch who that was. I'm not sure the best way to do that, honestly. Sometimes I think if people are having tech issues, and I can type this in the chat, it's easiest to just log in and out.
Got black here for honey. See,
okay.
There's no picture.
We'll let them try. Just try to log in again if you can hear. If you can't hear, I think maybe you can chat to him, Andrew. That would be helpful. Okay, our second area of focus is to introduce and apply systems thinking and design thinking methodologies. And something that I've been doing for the past 3 years that I've just really had a nice time at doing is attending design thinking courses in Palo Alto with SAP, which is the world's largest software designer. And for folks in Sonoma County who use ETO HMIS, that is the maker of the report writer Web Intelligence, that's SAP. So I've been taking design thinking classes through SAP, and I'm really sold on systems thinking and design thinking methodologies and want to bring those into the work that I'm doing. And then the third area is just really to help recognize and finesse the undervalued connective tissues that drive program success. I think that we are very targeted towards certain types of programs. We want to talk about rapid rehousing versus housing first versus street outreach versus other types of programs, but I think we often miss the infrastructure that we need to drive those kind of things forward. So that's really the focus of our project going forward. And we're going to be focusing on these 4 kind of high-level category areas through some speaking presentations like we're doing tonight, which we're calling leverage points. And those 4 areas are going to be innovation. And so we want to help program approaches to recognize service approaches that improve the customer experience and ultimately improve our results. Data literacy, and David Lewis, who's on the call tonight, is going to be helping to present some areas of that, to put some sessions together to educate key decision makers as well as the general public about the HUD data, because it's very multi-layered and difficult to understand. And oftentimes we go out and we quote things that we don't really know the background of, like the data collection stages, or the fact that, you know, our income measurements are only measured on a very limited number of project types. Project management is another area I really come to appreciate with my work in Alameda, talking about like accountability frameworks and especially risk mitigation. Where are we going off track and how can we bring that back on track? And then very fluid and helpful supportive communication structures. So we'll have some partners presenting about that. And then the last core area would just be what I call tactical HUD, which is how can we better our PIT methodology and how can we use some of our reporting tools with HUD for better goal management at the COC level. So over the next year, that's what we're planning to do. We've got about 10 partners who are going to be helping us put some of that together. Okay. And before we get started with Andrew, I'd like to just acknowledge there's some folks on the call tonight, and I see all 3 of you here. I don't know if everyone can see the gallery of people who are on the call, but Bill Barberg is here from Minnesota, and I want to talk a little bit about his work because it's really, really interesting. He is the president and founder of a group called Insight Formation, which is a Minnesota-based consultancy and technology firm that helps communities address complex social issues like addiction, chronic disease, and population health. He teaches innovation-driven learning and strategy empowerment for local housing challenges. And in fact, right now, he's collaborating with our very own Amy Appleton, who is in the gallery tonight. Amy is the founder of Share Sonoma. Part of the reason we're recording tonight is that Andrew's portion of the presentation is going to be posted on a website that Bill has for his company, and he's going to be doing a solution summit for the housing crisis, which is a 70-session lineup of innovators and program people from across the nation. So Bill, he's in Minnesota, so thank you. You're very brave to log in at this time of the day. The second acknowledgement I'd like to make is Tim Thomas, who is a postdoctoral scholar and researcher from the Urban Displacement Project out of UC Berkeley. He was the key researcher for a product called the Eviction Study, and we're going to put that up in the Google link tonight if anyone wants to download the Eviction Study. That is a white paper that contains like multi-metropolitan analysis over the neighborhood drivers of evictions. So I'm hoping to generate some local interest in Sonoma County to have Tim's team of data scientists do some work on our local data. And the last person I'd love to introduce is David Lewis, who's a close colleague of mine. We both serve on the board of the National Human Services Data Consortium, and David is the vice chair. NHSDC is an information and learning opportunity for those in our profession, the HMIS professionals profession. And we produce semi-annual learning conferences. In fact, this week we're just wrapping up our fall conference. It's been delivered completely virtually for 3 weeks. And it's really proven to be an excellent learning environment. And we've driven a very high level of successful attendee engagement. So normally those of us who go to the conference say we like to meet in the lounge afterward, and this is the best we could do. And I think it's been very successful. So those are the 3 folks I would like to acknowledge, and thank you all 3 for logging in. And now we're going to get going with Andrew, and I want to just let everyone know a little bit about how I got to know Andrew, and then he's going to introduce himself. So Andrew, I had heard about through a group in Marin County called the Venture Pad. That's operated by a gentleman named Chris Yolonis. It's a Marin-based business incubator, and I had been going to some sessions down there, and Chris was very excited about the progress that Marin County had made and connected me with Andrew. I finally got to meet Andrew in February, about 2 weeks. We were laughing about this. It was about 2 weeks maybe before the lockdown, and find out, just what his secret was about reducing chronic homelessness. And I kind of wondered at the time, why aren't we all flocking to find out why? What's the secret sauce right there? So I went down and visited with Andrew and was really energized about his approach. He really typifies what I think our field needs a little bit more, which is openness and an eagerness to share knowledge. And so Andrew, before you take over, I'm just saying I'll be as fascinated as everyone on the call is to hear about your secret sauce, especially around collaboration and service success. And at this point, I'm going to let you take this over, and we'll be watching, and I'll take the moderation.
Sounds great. Thanks so much, Teddie. Good evening, everyone. It's great to have you here tonight. I was invited to a panel on Monday, and we only had 6 people show up. So I'm really happy that we have a great turnout for this in the evening. I'm Andrew Henig. I originally actually grew up on the East Coast, but I've been out here in the Bay Area for over 10 years now. I came out through AmeriCorps Vista in the summer of 2010 and provided outreach services down in San Jose and Santa Clara County, working from Palo Alto all the way down to Gilroy. After my year of service with AmeriCorps, I got a job with Downtown Streets Team, which I think some of you might know is now in Petaluma. And I was, I think, the 5th or 6th employee. So I had a great opportunity to help design some of the employment services for that organization. And then in the summer of 2013, I moved up to Marin County to launch a branch of the Streets Team. And in Marin, I did that for almost 3 years. During that time, I also got my MBA from UC Berkeley with the plan of continuing down the social entrepreneurship track. And that was really my plan. But then the City of San Rafael in 2015, the end of 2015, created this director of homeless planning and outreach position. And I felt like there was still work to be done in Marin, and I wasn't quite ready to go. And though I wasn't really planning to enter into government service, I've been doing it for almost 5 years now. So in fact, I should say that as of July 1, I've actually shifted from a full-time role with the city to now I'm in basically like a part-time consulting role with the city. I'm also helping to lead, and I'll talk more about this later, a public-private partnership I helped co-found in Marin, Opening Doors Marin. And then also I'm working with another agency in Marin as well. So tonight I'm gonna run through a presentation that I've done before that just kind of gives a pretty high-level overview of what we did over the last 5 years. And I should say right off the bat that let me get this up here. Play from start. That I'm just one part of a much larger team. So I want to, I know one of my colleagues is here tonight, Karen. And so I just want to acknowledge that Downtown Streets team, the County of Marin, Home Urbana Marin, Ritter Center, St. Vincent's, these have all been huge key partners in this work. And so I'm just here kind of on behalf of the larger team. So with that being said, why don't we jump into it? And I think first things first, obviously, you all know Marin County pretty well, but I always like to start with this, that I think a lot of people, when they think about Marin, they think of that affluent county that's north of the Golden Gate Bridge. Maybe they think of the Civic Center and Frank Lloyd Wright's famous monument to public life. Maybe they think of the seashore or our really big trees. Even maybe the movie franchise inspired by those trees. But ultimately, a lot of people don't think about homelessness. And so there's often a question that I field, which is really, what problem do we have? And I think what's important is to pull the veil back behind a lot of that appearance. And Marin, over 80% of our land is permanently protected as agricultural or open space, recreational open space. That's all well and good. I think that's great, but the challenge is what happens on that remaining land. And unfortunately, Marin, the pace of housing development has been extremely slow, and the median home price is over $1 million. In San Rafael, where I've been working the past few years, even for someone that's working full time as a minimum wage earner, I think we all know in the Bay Area, it's beyond Marin, that the minimum wage is not really a living wage. And so if you were earning minimum wage in San Rafael and trying to afford the average 1-bedroom apartment, you'd have to literally work almost the entire week to be able to afford that at an affordable rate. Add to that, Marin, I don't know if folks have followed, there was a study that came out a few years ago that found that Marin is the most racially unequal county in California, despite the progressive values. The demographics maybe suggest a darker history, unfortunately. This is San Rafael, which I think most people would acknowledge is probably Marin's most diverse community. And even here you can see, this is from the 2010 US Census, the Canal neighborhood in orange. That's actually where 75% of Marin County's COVID cases have been, in the Canal. And then you can also see down here in the green, that's San Quentin State Prison. So I think this really speaks to the inequity that exists in Marin. And of course, like the rest of the state, over the last 40 or 50 years, we've seen an over 90% reduction in inpatient mental health beds for people that are having acute behavioral health issues. So when you combine all this together, if you can believe it, in 2017, Marin had the 7th highest per capita rate of homelessness in the entire country. And that was based on a report from the Bay Area Economic Institute, as well as McKinsey Consulting. So again, we don't have maybe the absolute numbers of a San Francisco or an Oakland, but relatively speaking, we have one of the worst homeless problems, or I should say we did have one of the worst homeless problems in the entire country. So that was 2017. I'm going to cover, like I said, the last 5 years. So I want to go back to 2015. And at that time, there was a really major concern from the public about really just the visible impacts of homelessness. And I think a lot of that was concentrated in downtown San Rafael. Like I should say here, I'm not 100% familiar with Sonoma County and everything that's going on there, but I know that, Santa Rosa, for example, has had issues like this. So very similar in San Rafael, a lot of visible homelessness in the downtown. At that time, the city, we didn't have any real strategic response. This was before I worked for the city. So some of the strategies were to create maps where people experiencing homelessness were allowed to hang out, quote unquote. We closed down a public park because that had become an area where a lot of people that were homeless were congregating, and that was something that the community did not want to see. There was a gentleman at that time who was sending daily emails to somewhere between 500 and 1,000 residents every day, talking about the ills of homelessness, including calling people experiencing homelessness urban terrorists. And so that takes us to March of 2016. And this was the very first city council meeting that I attended as the director of homeless planning and outreach. And that I should say the polarization, but basically the frustration in the community had really galvanized around one issue, which was in San Rafael, there are two downtown homeless service providers, St. Vincent's and the Ritter Center. And the public had basically decided all of our homeless problems in Marin and San Rafael are because of the Ritter Center. So if we can get the Ritter Center out of downtown San Rafael, all of our problems will go away. And half the community felt that way. And the other half of the community said, no, if anything, we need more services. And so, and that's me down here in the bottom right thinking, why did I take this job? I made a huge mistake. And so that was our starting point. We were divided, the political climate was really terrible. The relationships were fractured. And frankly, that's where I think a lot of communities find themselves, unfortunately. And so over the course of this presentation, I'm going to share 10 insights with you that I think we've learned over the past few years. And the first one is really that we really did have a problem. Something was not working. And, all the public concern and the concern from the advocate community, something really was fundamentally broken. But what we started to learn as we really unpack this and try to better understand what was going on is that there really is a continuum of people experiencing homelessness, from people who are temporarily and briefly homeless to people that are long-term chronically homeless. And if you look at this, the cost for chronic homelessness rise exponentially. So in Marin County, the average chronic homeless person costs about $65,000 per year in public services. In terms of community complaints, we see the exact same pattern. In Marin, well, I should say in San Rafael specifically, of people that are just visibly homeless, 70% of those folks generate zero 911 or criminal justice interaction, zero. But a small minority generates quite a bit of attention. And then lastly, in terms of vulnerability, these are also some of the most vulnerable people in the community, with studies around the country showing that people that experience chronic homelessness pass away on average 20 to 25 years earlier than their housed peers from treatable and preventable chronic illness. So that was really our new problem space. It wasn't everyone that was experiencing homelessness. It was people that were chronically homeless. And we realized that a lot of our challenges, almost like the 80-20 rule, 20% of the homeless community was probably generating 80% of our concerns. So I like to pause here and just say, and thinking about this insight, because I really think that this insight was the key kind of reframing that shifted everything that came after it. And so I like to pose this question to folks, which is, what would you do if you were about to become homeless? And as you give that a thought for a second, if you're struggling to come up with an answer, I've got an analogy. Imagine you were traveling through space and you encountered a black hole. What would you do? The strategy for both is the same. You would try to avoid it at all costs. And what we came to understand is that for the vast majority of people that experience homelessness, it is a one-time brief occurrence lasting a few short weeks or months that often requires very little public sector or social sector support or involvement for people to resolve. And so if you go back to this curve, even though the bulk of our problems were focused on chronic homelessness, almost all of our intervention was on people that were temporary, episodically homeless. And the logic, I think, in a lot of communities is, well, we don't want people to become chronically homeless, so we're going to support this other part of the curve. But the reality is that those are also the most likely people to self-resolve their homelessness or resolve their homelessness with very little assistance. And to take it one step farther, and this is more of my kind of personal thesis than our community's, I think, conclusion. If you look at the data on homelessness, you find that about 2/3 of people that are homeless cite economic reasons as their primary reason for being homeless. And then about 1/3 report that behavioral health, so mental health, addiction, substance abuse, traumatic brain injury, that was their primary cause of homelessness. So I think what's going on is you have this rapid turnover of people becoming homeless because of economic reasons. And then you have another group of people that have a much harder time self-resolving their homelessness because of their behavioral health issues. And that's really, to kind of dramatically oversimplify a very complex issue, I think that's the core dynamic that's driving a lot of homelessness across basically the entire country, in my view. So with that kind of reframing, we realized, we have a lot of really dedicated and smart and talented people in Marin, but we just have not been able to figure this out internally. So we need to finally look outside and do something different. And so we hit the road, and we got our service providers together, our elected leaders together, and we went up to Sonoma. Actually, we learned a lot from you all. We went to the East Bay, to the Peninsula, down to the South Bay. And really, we're just understanding how communities, some of you, of course, will probably recognize the Palms Inn. We're just trying to learn what other communities are doing, because again, we really didn't know what we were doing when it came to chronic homelessness. At the same time that we were doing these field trips, we also, trying to put my MBA to good use, started trying to actually map out our local system of care. And on this chart, I mean, the details are less important, but the middle of this chart is being homeless, and the outer rings are getting housed. And you can see the circuitous web of trying to get from homeless to housed. And we'd like to kind of point out, my colleague here, Howard Schwartz from St. Vincent's, has a PhD from Brown University, super smart guy. If he can't navigate this system, why would we expect someone who is addicted to methamphetamines and has a traumatic brain injury to do any better? What we were seeing was, and we really proved it with the mapping, is that we were obviously operating in silos. There was broken communication across partners. And it was really like the blind man and the elephant, where every part of the system thought they understood the whole system, but in reality, no one really understood what was going on. And so to, again, really distill this down around chronic homelessness, with chronic homelessness being primarily behavioral health driven, you have people that are inherently difficult to serve. And then over time, we created programs that, again, were well-intentioned, but they had even, small basic rules like sobriety rules, or you need to make an appointment, or you need to go from this part of the city to that part of the city. And people that have a lot of challenges can't do that. And so they would fail out of these programs, they would become more distrustful, they wouldn't seek help, and they would get worse. And the result was that there were people in our community that had been homeless literally 40 years, revolving through this cycle. And so that was really what we were trying to solve. And so, again, I think this leads to the next insight, which is that the problem, I think, can often be framed as it's the people not fitting into our programs. But I think what we really saw is that the problem is our system and how we're trying to support these really vulnerable people. And from all of our travels, I think the most impactful visit that we had was our trip to Sonoma and the Palms was hugely important, but we discovered a program in San Mateo that had started around, I think, 2010. And they'd been having the exact same problem that we had in San Rafael, where they had a lot of visible chronic homelessness in the downtown. And basically the police department said, enough is enough. And they brought all of the service providers together and said, look, these are the 10 most vulnerable, high needs, high visibility people in San Mateo. If you can't get these people housed, what are you doing? And and this program is called the Homeless Outreach Team. And a lot of communities have a quote unquote homeless outreach team, but this was a very specific methodology of having a by name list of the most vulnerable people and then convening on a regular basis to triage what were their unique needs. And so again, I think the insight here was that historically we tried to create, we're going to create a substance abuse program. We're going to create a co-occurring mental health and substance abuse program. We're going to create this program for women or this program for seniors. And really at the end of the day, people are, just like everyone on this call, everyone's so unique and their reasons for being homeless are so unique that you can't do these one size fits all programs and expect results. And so that's what we did. We said, you know what, this is new for us. Let's try it. And in March of 2016, we convened all of the major social service providers in the county, and specifically at that time in San Rafael. We included both executives and frontline staff because we wanted input about what was the reality on the street. And then when there were systemic barriers, we wanted executives there to hear that and be able to rapidly change whatever that barrier was. And so we met for the next 18 months, every other week, We all committed to regular attendance. St. Vincent de Paul Society of Marin deserves a lot of credit because they helped fund and project manage this, but basically everyone was there pro bono. We picked the 12 most visible, most vulnerable, most disruptive people in San Rafael, people who were getting EMS calls maybe daily, people who were passing out in our downtown business corridor, defecating themselves, people with behavioral health issues that were going into our businesses and screaming at customers. And we said, this is our focus. And part of it, and I can go into more detail later because I think there are a lot of questions about this, but part of it was once we started collaborating, we realized the necessity of needing a better release of information to actually share and coordinate around this population. And so all of these kind of innovations came about from really trying to be accountable to this by name list. Over those 18 months, we began to notice that you really do get what you measure. And if you focus on outputs and not outcomes, that's what you get. You get a lot of outputs. And in our community, historically, we were focused on, shelter. How many people are sheltered? How many nights of shelter are we providing? How many meals are we providing? And ultimately, while these things are important, and I don't want to diminish this, especially in terms of engagement tools, this is not ending homelessness. And for us, in the end, only 3 measures actually really mattered. Are we working with the most vulnerable? Are we getting them housed? And are they staying housed? And still to this day, there's some more measurements around the process, but this is the core of everything that we do. It's all about housing. And so with this change in outcomes, change in goals, when you change outcomes and goals, you change the system. And so we were finally able to move from managing homelessness, which we've been doing and was exemplified by that map I showed you, to really ending homelessness through housing first and just cutting through all the bureaucracy and the red tape and getting people inside where they really belonged. And the great thing was it worked. And so for those first 18 months, we housed 23 of the most visible, vulnerable, hard to serve, chronically homeless people in San Rafael. And so given that success, fast forward to 2017, we began to ask ourselves, is there a way to scale this? And so for us, it was hugely important to tap the expertise of external thought leaders. And even though oftentimes this was validating things that people in the community were already saying, I think having that third-party validation was very key. And so I know in Sonoma, you all have had Ian DeYoung come and speak. He came and spoke in Marin. And love or hate Ian, he definitely can shake up the conversation. But more importantly for us was something called Built for Zero. And so there's a national nonprofit called Community Solutions. I can tell you more about them, but Built for Zero is a national effort that now has over 80 communities in both the US and Canada that are using this by name list methodology to end chronic and veteran homelessness. And when I say end, what we're calling now, it's called functional zero. So the idea is that your by name list gets so low, but your monthly rate of housing placements, let's say your monthly rate of housing placements is 10. If your by name list gets below 10, and then even with like the inflow of new people, you're basically able to house people as fast as they're becoming chronically homeless. So that's the goal of what they're doing and really using data to get there. And so we use this methodology again to validate, I think, our pilot with the HOT team. And really, again, I mean, we're still active participants in this, getting a lot of support from all across the country about how communities are dealing with these issues around chronic homelessness and housing first. And I think the other thing that really came out of Build for Zero is that there are conferences, and now it's all virtually, but usually there are about 3 conferences per year. And it just happened to work out that all of the number 2s at our organizations went to this conference. And it's not to say if the number 1s had gone, it would have been different, but all of the deputy folks went to the conferences. And in addition to, learning sessions and everything, like it was actually a time for us to get away and truly build relationships with each other that didn't exist before. I think a lot of communities allege that they are collaborating and maybe they are, but they're not really friends or they're not really close colleagues. And that changed for us and we really became close. And it was because of that closeness that we were able to do things like So our primary shelter provider in Marin County, Homeward Bound, had a certain way of operating their shelter for a number of years. And as we began to learn more from Built for Zero in this process, we wanted to shift towards more of a focus on chronic homelessness. And Homeward Bound was already serving a lot of folks that were chronically homeless. But at that time in Marin, there was a push from another advocacy group to create another shelter. And we felt like, there's got to be a better way to do this. And ultimately, because of those partnerships, we rallied all of these advocacy groups together. We ultimately were able to transform the way that this particular shelter works to allow people to stay there all day, to have more service support that was funded by the county, and to change some of the program requirements for going in there. And again, it's worked out great. And I don't think it's a coincidence that San Rafael over the past few years has seen a 30% reduction in unsheltered homelessness because of some of these changes that we've done in partnership with Homeward Bound. And they're an incredible partner. And again, this was really built out of these deeper partnerships and relationships and friendships that we forged through Built for Zero. So what does the by name list look like? And again, this was getting us all on the same page of what is our shared strategy. So what does that look like in practice? I know some people on the call might be familiar with this idea of coordinated entry and how that works at a systems level. But basically, if you were to imagine a emergency room, and let's say Teddie has a broken arm and she's come to the emergency room, and then I come in an hour later having a heart attack, it doesn't matter if Teddie's there first. It doesn't matter if she's polite and nice and good at self-advocating for what's going on. It doesn't matter that I've come in hours later. Maybe I'm intoxicated. Maybe it's my second or third heart attack. I'm having the emergency, so I'm going to get treated first. And that was really the core shift for our community. So if you imagined everyone who's homeless in Marin County, we now have an assessment tool where we assess objectively, moving away from this subjectively determined list, objectively determine who is the most vulnerable person or people in our community. We then filter for the most vulnerable of that group, and that's the basis for our by name list. Importantly, that does not mean that we're not helping other people. It just means that we're better prioritizing our housing and case management services. And so on October 1st of 2017, coordinated entry became a county-wide system in Marin. And ever since, we've literally been following the system of assessing people, putting the most vulnerable at the top of the list, and then the most vulnerable people get the next units of housing and supportive services. And if someone new comes along and they need help and they're really vulnerable and they weren't in our system, then we bump them up and assist them. And the result of that is, again, this is like, I think one of the slides that really like summarizes everything that we've done. It's really a three-legged stool for us. There's the by name list strategy, that is key. And then I think the other kind of misconception, and I'm happy to talk about this later with Marin, is that being an affluent community, having a $1 billion community foundation, you would think that, oh, this has been solved by getting more donors or getting more philanthropic support. But the reality is that all we've really done is use this strategy and then reprioritize existing resources. So when it came to the services, every community in California, through something called whole person care, got new resources to address high healthcare utilizers in public systems. And so for our community, we really fought to use those whole person care dollars from the state to provide housing first level case management services for people on our by name list. Once we had those services, we went to our housing authority and said, hey, we want to use vouchers that are coming up just through attrition, because the housing authority at that time wasn't getting new vouchers. We want to use your vouchers that are coming up through attrition and also pair those with the top of the list. And so these three things are what have accelerated our progress so dramatically. And so from 2017, like I said, Marin County, 7th highest per capita rate of homelessness in the country, to 2019, we saw a 28% reduction in chronic homelessness. And when you really drill into it, that drop was almost exactly equal to the number of new permanent supportive housing units we created through the vouchers and the whole person care services. Over 90% of those people to this day are still housed. We've now housed close to 300 of the most vulnerable chronically homeless people in Marin County. In San Rafael, where I've spent most of my time in San Rafael, for people from before they were housed to after they were housed in San Rafael, we've seen a 54% reduction in EMS transports, and we've seen an 86% reduction in police calls for service for these folks. So again, these stats that have been validated all across the country on Housing First, we were able to replicate in our community. And so the last thing I'll say before turning it over to Q&A, just checking the time. Okay, good, we got time. The last thing I wanted to just touch on was, as we started to accelerate, especially around 2017 and the launch of coordinated entry as being our official strategy, we realized that we needed more than just the typical people at the table. And so, as I mentioned during the intro, I helped found an organization called Opening Doors Marin, which at that time was the Marin Chronic Homeless Action Task Force, or MCHAT, which was a horrible acronym. But basically, what was going on the housing development side was that you had all these different partners, housing developers, policymakers, advocacy groups, completely disjointed. And they weren't really understanding the strategy that we were pursuing. So, and the result was that, there was a lot of housing opportunities actually in Marin, but the process was ad hoc and it was reactive, and there really wasn't meaningful coordination. So these housing projects would come along and we would just fall apart and we couldn't actually execute on them. And so with Opening Doors, I convened this group that included philanthropy, business, real estate, cities throughout the county itself, the faith-based community. And we really said, we educated this group on the strategy, and we said, we really need to come around this centralized coordination and this centralized vision if we're going to make any progress. And so and we realized that the major barrier, again, ironically in Marin, to creating more housing was the money. And so in 2019, we spent almost the entire year exploring the feasibility of a public revenue measure for affordable housing. And ultimately, it was close. And I know there was a similar effort in Sonoma and Santa Rosa, but we didn't move forward with it. It was just, we were not confident enough. But interestingly enough, after that, moving into 2020, we said, we have so much data on our chronic and our veteran homelessness list that we could pretty confidently come up with a community business plan for how we would go about ending chronic and veteran homelessness. And so that was how it started in January, February. We were working on that. We actually do have that business plan. I'm happy to talk about it. But in July, when Project Home Key was announced to the state, and just for anyone that's not aware of Project Home Key, the state of California has repurposed some federal dollars that have come down for coronavirus aid so that communities can rapidly acquire motels, hotels, commercial properties, or other sites for permanent housing for people that are homeless. And so since July, I've been helping to, through Opening Doors, project manage a team that includes City of San Rafael, County of Marin, Marin Community Foundation, Homeward Bound has been part of that team, Eden Housing. And we are, again, it hasn't been approved, but we are on the verge of potentially securing 3 Project Home Key sites, pulling in $20 million in state funding, including probably about $10 million in local match. And I think I said 140 units, within 5 months. And frankly, that just would have been impossible if it weren't for this collaboration that's come through Opening Doors. And I should say, I did have a slide. This is a one of the commercial sites in San Rafael that we'd been, this property owner had approached us probably 2 or 3 years ago, wanting to sell it. But again, we just didn't have the collaborative partnerships or the financing in place to make that happen. So, so really, in hindsight, like a pretty incredible journey. And, as Teddie said, I think we're happy I'm happy to, anyone that's on this call, happy to connect you with partners of ours that are in Marin. And we're just trying to get the word out, because I think this by name list strategy really does work. And We've tried to lobby to the state to increase this as a strategy. We've talked to other communities about it. And I just really, really believe in it. And I know it works. So with that, that concludes my part. Yeah, I'll turn it back to you, Teddie.
Well, you don't really need to turn it back to me. I do want to open it up for Q&A, but I have to say that because you're the other host, you will see quite a bit of chatting between my HMIS colleague and I about like, oh my God, thank you for only having 3 measures that matter. And, you know, it really, I will just let everyone know, both David and I have heard of some potential reforms coming through some of these bureaucratic programs to actually focus on fewer measures, and they are those 3. So I wanted to open it up for questions, and there are a couple that came through the chat. So I believe folks can, let's see, is there a hand raising mechanism here? I don't really see that. A little hand.
I don't see it. Oh, I don't know. Oh yeah, it looks like Tim was able to.
Yeah, so Thomas, go ahead.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I was just going to say about the hand raising. You just touch the bottom, and then on the side, the right side, there's a more, and then the hand will come up, and then you touch the hand.
Okay, great. So why don't I get started kind of going through a couple of questions that came through the chat, and then if folks want to raise their hand and ask specific questions, I think as well, Andrew, you know, I had produced that question list from the registration, and maybe we could go through some of those.
Sure, yeah.
If that works. Okay, let's see. The first one, I see, David and I were talking about your sticky note system, so that's probably not. Bill Barberg says, great point on the one size fits all won't work well. Segmenting the homeless population can help with system design to better meet needs and improve effectiveness. Do you want to expand on that just a little bit? Like, I know I've told people I'm very excited about the fact that you deploy systems thinking in your approach. And can you tell people a little bit more about how that works?
Yeah, so to really kind of drill into tactically how that worked. So we started, as I said, the homeless outreach team was really this bi-weekly meeting. And it could have been just that, like we could have just met and talked about the 12 people that we were trying to support. But gradually over time, we realized, again, kind of going back to that blind man and the elephant analogy, that you know, there was a lot of confusion and misunderstanding about how certain processes in the community worked. Like, how do 5150s really work? What really happens when someone goes to jail? What's the referral process to, you know, probation-based housing programs? And like all these very specific in the weeds questions. So we, all those meetings were 2 hours. And so the first hour, hour and a half was talking about the clients and the case conferencing. And the other 30 minutes to an hour was having a partner talk about a very specific piece of the system that they inhabited. And so it just so happened, like at that same time when I was in my grad program, we were doing, I was doing this class about slums, like reimagining slums across the world. And so we were doing this sort of like sticky note redesign of like, how do these systems work and how do you change them? And so there were probably 7 or 8 iterations of that map. And so basically like I would take what I heard, I would go back to my office, like put it on sticky notes, draw arrows to how things fit together. I'd lug that map to our meeting place, get feedback, and then like basically destroy what I had created and start again until we felt like it was fairly confident that, you know, this is really how it works. And ultimately, you know, I think that map was, I mean, it definitely helped some things, but I think really in the end, it was just such a powerful visual of how broken things were and how, if you really focus on just housing first and just cut past all of the BS and just get people housed and then work on all those other issues, like that is the solution. So I think when people saw that map, it was just like, you just can't dispute it. Like it's so broken. And so that was the function that it served at that time. Since then, you know, I guess maybe more on like a personal note, like I've really focused on like the systems mapping, and I can send Teddie some links to this of like, what are the upstream causes that are basically making the modern homelessness crisis as bad as it is. And so I can send that as like another example of how those kind of things fit together.
Yeah, that would be great. You know what I thought I would do real quickly here, if you don't mind, and letting me show my screen about, just something that I've worked on with one of our partners from Florida to show like my version of what a system problem map might look like. And I don't know if this is too small, but basically I broke it down into what are the factors that we have indirect influence over, what might we have direct influence over, and then what can we really do to move the needle. And of course, because I'm a big fan of infrastructure strength, I put some of these things like the project management, everybody being really clear about what policy means to do their job, as well as the local community. I think that's where the system comes in. Andrew, you've done this a lot more than I have, so correct me if I'm wrong. But I think that our community needs to be as aware and understanding of like our resource constraints as our providers are, that they see every single day. So that was one little piece that I had put together. And it is just, we need to hit each one and recognize that it's just, I think this is where we get a little bit wonky on the housing first debate, which is, we think if we just do housing first in our own definition of whatever that looks like, it's going to work, but there are so many influences that make it difficult.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's true. I mean, I think, zooming out, having done, some presentations in other communities, and I think in the homelessness sector, there's a real credentialing problem, honestly. Like, it's almost like there needs to be like an organic label for like homeless programs, because, I've gone to other communities and we've talked about this, and people will say, oh yeah, we have a homeless outreach team, and yeah, we're doing housing first, and yeah, we do this. But the reality is that they're not actually the same. And so I think that's a huge issue. And more importantly, and I think this is also the system's view, the system is bigger than any one element or piece of it. And so you can't just have an isolated standalone housing first program and call it a day. Like, our whole strategy in Marin is predicated on people's vulnerability. And so housing first is a piece of solving housing for the most vulnerable, but vulnerability is like the core organizing principle. And so that is a systemic feature that, I think a lot of communities maybe aren't doing. So.
Okay. I'm gonna move down the chat list here and ask you a question from Oliver Marks. And he wanted to know what happens when lots of new people come in from out of state or out of your county even with chronic homeless problems. And I'm just gonna rephrase that a little bit, Oliver, to say that in our work, chronic homelessness is an assessed value through our HMIS software. So we have to answer a series of questions to determine chronic homelessness. That is not a decision point of a case manager or a housing navigator or something like that. So do you all have a policy about out-of-town people? Do they rise to the top of your by name list just as quickly as anybody else?
It's a good question. And, I think our data would suggest that if you build and create the housing, then the rates of homelessness go down. I mean, I think that's been our experience is that you create the housing, homelessness goes down. Across the Bay Area, from what I've seen, across the 9 Bay Area counties, 70 to 85% of people that are homeless in a given county lost their housing in that county. Marin is on the lower side of that, around 70%. I think I've actually seen that Sonoma is actually more on the high side. So that's just kind of like, it's a common thing that we hear. And I think that often just results in people not acting, and that just makes the problem worse. I think the beauty of the by name list, and this is to borrow a somewhat crass analogy from Ian DeYoung, but the way that he framed it is that when you really have a good by name list, then you know who your anchor people are, and you know who your quote unquote tumbleweeds are. And so to this day, there are people that are new to the community that maybe they come from San Francisco, maybe they come from up north from harvesting, and they're just on their journey. And what used to happen is that they would get somehow involved in the criminal justice system, or our outreach services would go engage them right away. And then they're like, oh, hey, like, okay, this will work. I'll be here. And what we've learned through the by name list approach is, rather than like saying that we're not going to help people that are not from the area, we just say, we target our outreach and our resources on people that are already deeply in the system.
Okay.
And so if those folks end up staying, great. But if they move on, then they never really engage with our system in the first place. The other thing I'll say is that, and this is from Ian as well, is that, and it goes to this whole like people that are maybe less vulnerable, self-resolving, is that he did a big study. He ran a shelter program in Toronto. And basically he found that if you gave people 2 weeks to self-resolve their homelessness after coming into the shelter, that was kind of the sweet spot. And people, if they could self-resolve, would resolve in that period. But if they were longer than 2 weeks, then they needed more help. And that was the point that they did the assessments and did the additional work with them. And so it's a little bit different because people that are more transient are not newly homeless, but I think we use that same philosophy of like, let's just give it like a couple weeks. And then if they're still hanging out and still having issues, then we'll engage more deeply.
That's great. It's an interesting insight data element from my perspective. I'm writing it down. So thank you. Pam Swan wanted to know if you could talk about your plan for ongoing operation. And Pam, you may want to unmute and explain this a little bit better, but she says home key funding is great for securing sites, but PSH, and for everyone else, that means permanent supportive housing projects, are often challenging to cobble together the funding. And Pamela, do you want to unmute and talk about that a little bit more? Yeah, so you can kind of educate our audience too.
Well, yeah, you know, example I'll give is the Palms Inn, which, you know, you visited, Andrew. I know Teddie and many others are familiar with that project. It's an incredible project. I was just looking at the APR that we were doing, you know, 90% retention rate, et cetera. But boy, is it challenging to fund. Those operating costs are really high. And we are very excited about having more PSH sites within Sonoma County. Several home key projects are in line in that our county has received funding for some. However, you know, it concerns me, are they gonna, you know, it's very easy sometimes to stand up projects, but to provide the love and care and stewardship, I'm gonna say her. Sorry, I just realized. You know, is really challenging. So I was wondering if you had any insight with regards to that. Go there.
Yeah. It's a great question. And I think, and again, this is just something I used to have, this was like Insight 11 in that presentation, but the partnership with the Housing Authority is so critical. Almost everyone that, I mean, there's been some housing placements that have come through attrition in our existing permanent supportive housing programs, which are mostly HUD funded. But the vast majority of the people that we've housed have been through housing vouchers. And I think what a lot of communities do, and it's understandable because it's costly, is, you know, they wait for state funding, they wait for all these different funding sources to come together to then build new permanent supportive housing. And there's definitely a place for that. But, you know, if you have housing vouchers, you can immediately deploy those. And once someone has a voucher, that's, you know, into perpetuity. That's potentially for the rest of their life. And so I would say at this point, probably 80% of people that we've housed, of those 300 people the past 3 years, it's been scattered site rental units throughout the community. And so one of the ways that we did that was the county of Marin back in 2016 or so. Marin had a really low voucher utilization rate. And so the county invested a couple $100,000 in creating a landlord partnership program where we had a dedicated housing locator. She had private sector real estate experience. We had, you know, higher security deposits. We had a 24/7 assistance line. And so our utilization of vouchers shot up. And then because of that utilization, we said, well, hey, we're helping you. Why don't you help us with the vouchers? And so that's been huge moving forward. And then now with all of our home key sites and basically any other permanent supportive housing that we're building, the goal is always to project base those vouchers. So that's how the operating costs are getting covered. There was a concern that's worth noting, and we've been kind of trying to figure out how to manage this, but the state was going to cancel whole person care, or not renew it basically. And so for the service dollars, that was our real potential gap of how are we going to continue the service dollars. But fortunately, we've kind of cobbled that together. So.
Mm-hmm. Thank you for that. Tim Thomas from Berkeley, would you mind unmuting yourself and going a little deeper on your question for Andrew?
Yeah, so I think that I'm always trying to figure out the devil's advocate question, just because those are the people that, 48 to 55% of the population you need to convince to pass policy. And I'm just kind of curious, you showed a 28% drop in homelessness. That sounds like you're just addressing chronic homelessness, but I'm just curious what happened during that time to the other groups, the temporary and folks that are a little more advanced, just basically non-chronic homelessness. And then just out of curiosity, do you think, if a similar focus was attempted on these other groups, would it be as effective? It's kind of a rough question. Basically, what happened to the other groups during this time period? Was there kind of a latent lag effect or not?
Yeah, it's a great question. So over that period of time, we had a 7% overall decrease in homelessness and a 28% decrease in chronic homelessness. So at that time, I want to say there was like 1,100 people that were homeless in Marin, and about a third of them were chronically homeless. So I think a lot of that housing helped bring the overall group down, but maybe there was just a more marginal decrease overall, or basically there wasn't an increase. And I think it's important to know over that same period of time across the Bay Area, San Francisco had, I think, like a 30% increase in homelessness. Contra Costa, Alameda had 40% increases. So all things considered, like no increase was actually, I think, progress for us. It is worth noting, I noted in the presentation that the way that our assessment works is that it's on a scale from 0 to 16. And so basically the scale suggests if you score above an 8, you need long-term permanent supportive housing. For people that are more like 5 to 7, or even like a little bit lower, that's where we're targeting our rapid rehousing. So that's more of that traditional like short-term assistance and case management. So it's not that group's not getting assisted. It's more just we've gotten better. I think what used to happen is there was a lot more like the 5s to 7s ended up in our like 10 plus housing, and then the 10 plus like never got helped. And so I think we've just kind of right-sized who's getting what and how, and that's worked really well.
Yeah, I can imagine that just improving the efficiency in one group would empower the other group to be impacted as well. I think this is incredibly great. I love it. And the fact that you didn't see an increase that blows my mind. It really does. Like statistically, that's amazing.
Yeah. The other thing to add to your question is this kind of like by name list approach. So based on this by name list approach, I can't like really publicly share this widely, but I can say that I'll say this. I'm confident that in 2021, we're going to meet our goal of ending veteran homelessness using the same methodology, like working down the same by name list. We're also really close, and hopefully through Project Home Key, getting very close to ending unsheltered family homelessness. And a lot of it's just driven by like, we know who all these people are and we can go find them. And it doesn't mean there aren't going to be people that become homeless, but I think we've just gotten really good at, coming up with strategies for them. So the final thing, just because you're here and I saw that you're here, I'd be curious to talk about this later, is the other curious thing that Ian DeYoung said, and I'd love to see like more academic research on this, is that for some people that enter a homeless system of care, by having all these like resources and this potential for resources, you kind of create this expectation in people's mind that, oh, like if I just wait, like the system is going to take care of this for me. And I've had this like kind of curious hypothesis over the past few years that because we've shifted to like really saying like we really only have housing resources for the most vulnerable, I can't help but wonder if that has led people that are less vulnerable to not like be inclined to want to wait around and just maybe they figure out other solutions. And so I don't have any way to like prove that, but I can't help but wonder like if that expectation setting has also been key to this. So if you want to research it together.
Yeah, there you go, Tim. You got a project out of this deal.
Sweet, another one.
Yeah, right. Oliver and Bill, I'm going to skip over just because we have a lot of questions coming in and I want to get to people who haven't been able to ask questions. And then if we have time, we'll circle back, or I'll make sure I get you the answers one way or the other. So Masami is asking that, and commenting that she's met many homeless people over the years who are from outside of Sonoma County and who came to Sonoma County because they heard from their peers that this is the place to be if you're looking to receive support. Can you comment on that in terms of Marin, and then I can kind of comment about what our data shows from the pit count, the ASR pit count.
Yeah, I mean, I'll just say briefly, I think I touched on it a second ago. I just, there certainly is some transient activity. I think, denying that is just not truthful. But, for us, the reality is that the vast majority of people are local. And by shifting our focus to be more, having the by name list and really having that kind of accountability, the vast majority of people that are chronically homeless, they're not moving around. Their behavioral health is such that, they have a, half a mile radius and that's their universe. And so there might be some transient activity, but, that's, I just don't think that that's like a major factor. The other thing that I think is worth noting, just tactically in our community, and giving a shout out to Karen, who I see has joined us, is that while I probably wouldn't say this in San Rafael, but even though the vast majority of people that are homeless in Marin County are local to Marin, the vast majority of people that are homeless in San Rafael are not from San Rafael. They're from other parts of Marin. And so what we would find in the point in time count is that, the issue is pretty well distributed across the county, but during the day, I think a lot of people would come to San Rafael for services, and that is what it is. And so the city, through my role with the city, a big part of it was trying to work with other communities to increase geographic equity for the programs that we're doing. And so I think the streets team has been a perfect example of a program that started in San Rafael, is now operating all across the county. With Karen's team support, we started a mobile shower program. Because of that shower program, we ended shower service downtown, and we now have it, in San Rafael, but also in 3 other communities in Marin. And so I think that tactical, really getting every community to step up to the plate has been key in making sure that, for other pockets of homelessness in Marin and Novato and Richardson's Bay and West Marin, that services are going to where people are. And so thus in San Rafael, you're not feeling that same maybe volume of people that was the case maybe 5 years ago.
Yeah. And I'll just add, Masami, and maybe a couple of people on the call would want to update this even more than my knowledge. But when I was doing the HMIS administration here locally, we always were running on average about 83% became homeless in our county, who lived in our county and had been there 10 years or more. So I don't know, Mark, if you've read that more recently, or Jenna, if you've read that more recently, but it was for all 5 years that I was doing AHART calculations, that was a solid trend, right around 1% to 2% different. Okay, Marion asks, how impacting do you feel this approach would be without, and so Marion, you may want to unmute because I'm not sure which approach. Are you talking public-private partnership or foundation support? But you, how do you, yeah.
I'm talking about the involvement of Marin Community Foundation and their commitment to putting incredible dollars. I know I'm on the board of Homeward Marin, putting incredible dollars towards addressing the homeless situation. We don't have a similar foundation. We've got Community Foundation Sonoma, but really they don't put any significant amount of money. It's not comparable. And I've asked MCF many times to help us in Sonoma, but they don't go there. So how effective do you think this whole process would be without the involvement of MCF and Tom Peters in particular?
Well, I would say just, as I've done this roadshow, that I really, on one hand, extremely grateful for MCF. You're right. There's a lot of housing programs and things that would have never, especially built physical housing, that would never happen, including many of the homeward bound sites. So having philanthropy in the community is key. That being said, I think this strategy that we've had around working with the housing authority on the vouchers, and then just working with repurposing existing funds through the county and basically the healthcare system for case management. I think that's independent of any community foundation or any private giving. And so I think any community can replicate that strategy. Rough back of the envelope, thinking about like the past 3 years, like Marin Community Foundation funded Victory Village. We got basically, I think 11 people housed there. They helped fund
Oma Village.
Yeah, but I think that was outside of our count. And then they helped fund King Street. So I would say like total of the 300, like they played a role in helping to fund housing for maybe 50 people. And so the vast majority were, again, the scattered site vouchers. The other thing that I would say that has been helpful with MCF, and again, they are a key partner. I really just want to make the point that you don't need a community foundation to have the kind of success that I think we've had. The other thing that they've done is we convinced them to give us a couple $100,000 that they do in like one-time money, but we can sometimes get it renewed, that we use for like miscellaneous things that come up. Like if an apartment gets trashed by somebody, we use that to help clean it up. If we have issues with like past evictions, we use that for, addressing that. So that kind of unrestricted funding really helps with the landlord engagement. And again, that's something that I think the community foundations help with, but it's not like some crazy amount of money that could not be raised in another community.
Good to know about that. I'm just going to let everyone know we're about 15 minutes out. I'm willing to stay to 8:15. I don't know if others want to, but I'm looking here in my chat and I have 31 new messages. So I guess I'm just going to go from the top down and get to what we can. And then if people want to stay late, we can do some more, or you and I could record later, Andrew, and you could address those questions.
Teddie, we lost your audio. I don't know if that's just me.
She muted.
Oh, Teddie, we can't hear you.
Homelessness, and are interested in finding out more.
Teddie, we lost the first part of that question, I think.
Okay. Well, it's down under Claudia Luke, Sonoma State. It said, have you ever worked with water quality regulatory agencies as part of the collaboration to end chronic homelessness?
Shorter answer on that is no. We do have and actually maybe Karen could speak to this at some point around, I know with like the streets team in the South Bay, for example, there were partnerships with the water districts to fund the downtown streets team work experience programs to have people that were experiencing homelessness actually go clean up areas where there were encampments and there was an environmental impact from that. So so we haven't in Marin had that nexus with our chronic homeless efforts, but I have seen where there have been creative public-private partnerships to create really cool like job training programs or placements.
David, wait, I'm going to jump down to your question because that's a tender one for us in the business, which is around housing first. And what David wants to know is, he says that he understands this is a housing first approach, but were employment service providers such as vocational rehab services involved in the centralized coordination team?
It's a good question. And again, I'm glad Karen's here actually, because the streets team is one of our major employment services. I'd say they're probably the preeminent homeless employment service in Marin. And so that's definitely a key piece of the puzzle. And I would also say, and again, I would let Karen kind of speak to what they do and how that works. But the other thing I would add is that as we've approached housing first, there's housing first where you have kind of one-off case managers at a 1-to-17 ratio of helping people. And then we've also created something called an assertive community treatment team, which is a best practice for helping folks, particularly with behavioral health challenges. And that team is meant to be a multidisciplinary team of working with, I think it's supposed to be like 120 people, and it's like an 8-person team or something like that. But that team has case managers, it has a nurse, and it's also supposed to have an employment specialist. We don't currently have that in Marin, but like that's the full fidelity version of that program. Again, I would defer to Karen, but I think for people having long-term success, it's super critical. And there are people that are in our downtown streets team program in Marin that are in permanent supportive housing. And then once they're there, they're using that kind of job training and experience to increase their income, have somewhere to go during the day, regain that sense of community and purpose. And so that's a critical next step because, you know, not to make light of it, but I think sometimes there's this expectation of you house people and then they're going to watch like Game Show Network the rest of their life. Like they're human beings, they want community, they want purpose.
Yeah.
And so it's critical to have that as part of the continuum.
Thank you.
I am going to skip over some of the comments I'm seeing in the chat because we're going to download the chat. So I want to keep focused on the questions while we have you, Andrew. So Susan Adams from Rohnert Park asked me, do you, and I think she means you because I don't have a sense of this. She said, do you have any sense that more commercial sites will become available during the economic downturn that can be used for permanent supportive housing? And so I guess that's a question about what are you hearing from the state or what, you know.
I've heard that there's certainly, I think across the state, some heartburn about Project Homekey and the speed at which it's happening. You know, I definitely hear that. I was telling Teddie earlier and some of the folks that were here, I was in a meeting in Novato last night for 3.5 hours with over 200 community members that were really unhappy about one of the Project Homekey sites. And I get it. Like it's, you know, and Homeward Bound and Marion can speak to this, like our typical process is many years of engagement and building support. And that's why Homeward Bound has such a great reputation in Marin, is that they do the hard work and they build the support. So that being said, I mean, I you know, for better or worse, I think there is this real opportunity right now to leverage what's going on with the coronavirus and the federal funding to do more. I have heard maybe there'll be another round of Homekey funding in the new year because the current funding is federal funding actually that's been repurposed and it expires at the end of the calendar year. That's why it's been so rushed. So I wouldn't be surprised if maybe there's one more round of Homekey funding. And if there is, I think a lot of communities maybe have reached out to their hotels and motels and, you know, they've either expressed interest or not. And if they've run out of those, then commercial sites are next. And, you know, at least for us, our commercial site was our lowest per unit cost. So I think it could be a real win-win.
Yeah, you too. I have several questions that are similar. So Grace and Marion, I'm going to skip over yours for just a second and go to Gregory Farron's question, where he says, to what degree can you credit the historical integration of county departments in health and human services and the close relationships with the city in your success?
I would say, I mean, that was critical. Like, I mean, a lot of, when I first started working for the city, it was really not good. And so there had been some early movement towards having like city county staff meetings. But I think, you know, honestly, like, and it wasn't me personally, I don't think, but like, I think the city investing in a dedicated role and like putting some, you know, resources in the game allowed just having more time to build those relationships. Like I really, I don't know. I mean, I know it's like a weird thing to fund or want to invest in, but I think having like people that can like build relationships is actually super, super important. And so the first like year and a half or so that I was in my role, like, you know, we'd have monthly staff meetings with, you know, me, our police chief, city manager, county, you know, health and human services, executive staff. We'd have, you know, breakfast meetings with our electeds and talks, you know, strategy on these different things. So, and some of them were really heated. Like, you know, there were some where people walked out and left and people were not happy. So it was not easy, but, you know, I think finding that space for dedicated partnership building is huge.
I'm really glad you mentioned that, Andrew, because, you know, when David and I are lucky enough to be in person at NHSDC last year, a year ago in Austin, we heard about this 3-way partnership for youth homelessness down there. I don't know if you've heard of the LifeWorks project, but the lady who's the ED of LifeWorks just basically started out and said,
oh, we lost you, Teddie. Oh no. We lost you again.
We can blame Windsor.
Tell me when I'm back.
You're back. You're back.
Yeah, just that it was the people that came to the table had to agree to disagree, and it was structured very well. And I think they funded that project to the tune of $38 million. David, correct me if I'm wrong, but they are definitely showing life-changing outcomes with those youth because they've had very difficult discussions and worked through them.
Yeah. The other thing I would add on that is, and again, this is like grossly oversimplified, I think probably what's going on, but I think we also over the years got like a little bit clearer about who's going to pay and do what. And so I think from the city side, there was more of an expectation that for outreach and, you know, even programs like the streets team, like that kind of work, like the city is going to really, cities are going to step up and provide a lot of that. And then the county is going to provide more of the case management to support the permanent supportive housing. So I think over time, like we each kind of found our funding niche. And so, you know, the city's never going to be able to contribute at the county level, but like everyone felt like, okay, like you have skin in the game and it's a partnership.
Does anybody else have a question that would like to turn their mic on? Thomas, I think that you don't come on the screen. So did you want to ask a question? And please,
yes, thank you.
Okay.
Hi. I have a question about the structure of your county, because we're going through the structural redo of our COC, and I'm wondering if yours, if you are, I imagine San Rafael is its own HUD entity, and then maybe the CDC, if you have, that's its own entity, but maybe there's only Novato in addition to that. And so how do you coordinate, or have you coordinated, am I understanding the structure of what your different HUD entities are and how you do your COC?
Well, I would say to that, and I'm a little bit, because our COC is run, or I guess like managed, quote unquote, by the county. So I'm a little bit less like in the weeds on that stuff, just to like preface that. But I would say, you know, 5 years ago, basically what was going on is that we had monthly COC meetings where everyone sat around and no one really liked each other, to be honest. And everyone just kind of advocated for their piece of like the pie. I mean, that was really the status quo. People hated those meetings, hated going. It just, I mean, it sucked. Like, just to be honest, it was terrible. And so what happened was when we peeled off, or not peeled off, but when we started piloting that HOT program, all of those providers that were going to that meeting, rather than like talking about maybe like big philosophical issues about like what are our priority areas through our COC, and I mean, it's shocking. Like, again, like you're really focused in a community with thousands of people that are homeless. You're talking about a dozen people, but like there was this parallel effort to like have those meetings and make our accountability about those people. And over time, what happened was our COC, like a lot of like the standing committees just stopped meeting, and like it became more of just like an approval entity. And the real work was happening through the coordinated entry subcommittee, which was basically like where we were doing that work around the by name list and chronic homelessness. And then ultimately, like coordinated entry kind of like came back in and was like, oh yeah, we're doing all this awesome stuff, so like everyone should just approve it. And like the majority of people that were, you know, part of the COC were also part of that like by name list work. So I will say not everyone was, though. And so there was definitely some like friction there. But, you know, in terms of like running the meetings, Home Base, which is like a Bay Area consulting firm, like they do all the like the logistics of that. But the county basically was like, because the county was like such a strong entity in our HOT process, we kind of helped like what the HOT team, the coordinated entry team subcommittee wanted, like the rest of the COC eventually came along. And just structurally, there's only one COC in Marin, which is countywide. The cities don't have their own. And there's also only one housing authority that covers the whole county. The cities don't have their own.
Yeah, that's what I was asking. You've hit on so many of the critical issues, the foundation funding, tenant problems and the landlords with the miscellaneous fund. But I think we may have overcome this a little bit. We've had for a long time, we had denial that in the outlying areas there were any homeless. We don't have any homeless out here. Now, oh, we have homeless. You know, why aren't you funding anything over here? Well, because for years you denied you had any homeless. You know, you didn't have a homeless problem. And getting that collaboration. So where it's very interesting what you're saying about through coordinated entry, we may find one way or another. I don't know that it's coordinated entry because they gave that to Catholic Charities, and that kind of became a point of friction itself, because Catholic Charities was the entity to do coordinated entry, and to a certain extent that became a friction because they were prioritizing people for other programs that, well, let's just say that there was a significant difference between what a VSPDAT would do or SPDAT would do in terms of priorities versus what they had before. So all of a sudden their whole program became impacted. And that, of course, had to do with Catholic Charities giving them the hard cases rather than the actual SPDAT or VSPDAT, which identified the hard cases, and prioritized them. So at any rate, that became a huge friction. How do we get the collaboration now that we've gotten over the denial, not being the only river, outside of Egypt? We're over the denial. We need the collaboration. How do we do that?
So Thomas, if I could just jump in here and just say, I think that the collaboration piece and the relationship piece deserves another session with Andrew, because it's a pretty detailed topic. If you don't mind, and he has agreed to come back, and I wanted to make sure Jerry had a chance to speak as well, and then we're probably about time. So if you don't mind, do you mind, Thomas, if we kind of park that and bring that back in a more concerted discussion, maybe in a month or so?
Okay, and the other thing I thought was really important was how he just went right to the point, which is their COC met monthly, and ours doesn't meet but once every 2 months or once every 3 months. So it's ridiculous on its face.
So we got a lot of work to do there, but maybe we'll have more information by the time we can get together again.
Yeah.
And Teddie, maybe just briefly, I will say, I do think that what's been interesting in Marin is that, and again, I don't know all the politics in Sonoma, and I know it sounds like there's some tension. So I acknowledge that, but I think the city of San Rafael, and even the county, but really the city of San Rafael, there's kind of like a convening authority that in the early days we used of just hey, the city of San Rafael, we really want the providers to focus on these 12 people. These are the priority people. Focus on these people. We'll support you and have your back, that this is the strategy. And then over time, our coordinated entry, wasn't provider centric, but it was very San Rafael centric because a lot of the work started there. And over time, what happened was we basically were able to go to other cities and towns in Marin that had an issue and said, if you want to participate in this, we're getting people housed, but you need to be funneling people into this system and create your own outreach capacity. And it's not exactly what we have in Marin, but going back to even the San Mateo example, they now have 4 or 5 hot teams across the entire county, each working their own by name list that funnels up to a countywide list. So, again, just starting small, that can eventually trickle into countywide collaboration, but happy to talk more about that next time.
Thank you. And Jerry, I think you had raised your hand. Did you still want to ask something or make a comment?
Well, I just wanted to comment and then ask my question, as most people on this call know, is always ends up talking about transparency. So I would contend that Sonoma County has, through the IMD team, multidisciplinary team, as well as all of the work that's been going on right now between the CDC and behavioral health and homeless providers to house the people who are at the non-congregate shelters. We know who those 250 or 300 people are right now. And there's a tremendous amount of stuff that's happening behind the scenes. We need a communication protocols that the entire community can know what's going on, so the entire community can know how they can contribute. How did they address the issue of transparency in Marin?
Well, I would say maybe it's not to evade your question about transparency. I would say, because this was a big part of my job. My job title with the city was Director of Homeless Planning and Outreach. That wasn't on the street outreach, it was public engagement. And so I think what we did was, and again, we were very transparent about the hot team, the pilot, and all that kind of stuff. None of that was hidden. But we really leaned into this hypothesis that the vast majority of our problems were caused by chronic homelessness. And for even to this day, but I mean, really those first 2 years, it was chronic homelessness is the problem. Chronic homelessness is the problem. The vast majority of people that are homeless are fine. Like chronic homelessness is the problem. And if we house people that are chronically homeless, things will get better. And ultimately, as we did, like, I mean, even just like one person at a time, like things actually got better. And the business community and residents were like, hey, like, I don't see like, you know, Joe, who I used to see all the time that used to like do X, Y, and Z. And so it was like slow, but that was the talking point, was like 80-20 rule, 20% of the homeless community is causing 80% of the challenges. And then even though like that might sound like hard, a little bit harsh, what I would find, and having conversations with community members, even like the most frustrated community members, is when you could frame it down to that 20% and then basically say to them, like, you know, again, like, be a little bit crass, but I would be like, you know, what would it take for you to like defecate in front of a business? Like, no sane, sober person is doing that. Like, these are the most vulnerable people that have serious mental health issues, serious substance abuse issues. And that, like, 9 times out of 10, like the light bulb went off, and you could like regain compassion for people, even when they were angry, of like, okay, like, I don't like this behavior, but I can understand, like, it really is this behavioral health issue. And then you could frame it in like the bigger problem of like deinstitutionalization, and everyone agrees that was a huge mistake. So you could gradually, through that conversation, get that support. And then we would tell people what we were doing to like solve it, but like, which was transparent, but like, that was the communication marketing campaign.
And I would say that communication and transparency of what we're doing right now could make all of us very proud of what we're doing. We are, in fact, helping some extremely vulnerable people, but we have to talk about it, and we have to get the system designed so it does it better.
There's been a huge amount done. It's amazing what has been done since the governor turned on the fire hose. But I wanted to focus on what Andrew said, which was, I think, a 50% reduction in EMS and a 80% reduction in police calls. That's fantastic, and that's really what we need. You know.
Yeah, and Thomas, you know, there have been several comments in the chat that I don't think you can see, folks asking, can we substantiate some claims that are being made around various things? And part of what I'm going to do with Andrew in the next week or so is cite some of that information and those data sources, because I think one of our misunderstandings about transparency comes from we do not produce publicly palatable, understandable information. So. So anyway, does anybody else have a question? Because we're a little bit over time. And unless I can send everybody the chat and you can see and we can reschedule, Andrew, I think I'm going to draw things to a close, if you don't mind. Anybody else? Questions?
Yeah, you know, the collaboration time, when is that going to be?
Yeah, I'll reschedule that with Andrew because I don't know. Sitting here right at this moment, but we'll let people know in another week or so with a save the date.
Excellent.
Okay. I just want to say, Andrew, thank you so much. This is like perfect for what we want to do as partners about getting, you know, some of these information gaps addressed to help people do better, you know, make better decisions all the way around, no matter what your role is in the community. I just want to end up with telling folks what my 2 big takeaways were about this. First was the fact that you developed a community-wide business plan. I think that's really, really important. That speaks to collaboration. And one of my most thrilling moments was when you showed your map about going places with your stakeholders to see how other people were doing things. In innovation, that's called Get Out of the Building, and I think it's really valuable. So, so anyway, that's what we hope to bring through our presentation series, is you can sit right there with your Sonoma County wine and get out of the building. And there have been some great ideas. I want everyone to see this chat. And then Bill, you made some great points too that I'll kind of highlight when I paste those into the Word document. So what I look for tomorrow, kind of a follow-up to this session with like a tiny little survey about what, if anything, you found of value, what you'd like to hear more of. And then along those lines, I'll be letting you know when I can reschedule with Andrew. It'll definitely, I mean, we're short of time now because of Thanksgiving, but definitely before the next 5 weeks, we'll get something going. So thank you very much. And it was great to see everybody.
What's Marion's last comment?
Yes. Oh, Marion, so sorry.
Yeah. Again, coming from Marin County and living in Sonoma County now for 3+ years. And I saw a lot of what Andrew was talking about as being on the board of Homeward Bound and the struggles that, you know, we had as an organization and as a community and as a county doing something actually about the homeless situation. I want to move beyond talking into actually doing this in Sonoma County. And I've never seen so many incredible activists as we have in Sonoma County, because we did not have those activists in Marin County. And I lived in Marin County for 19 years. We have an incredible group of dedicated individuals who want to help our unsheltered find shelter. And yet we as a community, and Jerry, you could say we've been really effective. My understanding of the stats is about 10% reduction at a cost of $14 million. If we keep going like that, it's going to be $1.2 billion to actually get everyone housed. So I think we need to be more innovative and more efficient in how we are addressing this. How do we execute this in Sonoma County? What do we need to do? I don't know that anyone from Sonoma County is on this call. I don't know if Barbie Robinson's on this call, if Michael, you know, Chuck, any of these people that we really need to move forward with this and not just keep talking about it. Because I'm kind of done talking. I want to do.
I agree with Marian. I just want to add that just like the Chinese say, a journey of 1,000 miles starts with one step. But we have difficulty finding that one step, because everybody have been fighting each other and there's no transparency. Nobody know what everybody else is doing, and also hiding the fact, and also going for the same funding source. So they're fighting each other. So if we're going to have the next session, I would like to have that addressed if possible. Okay. Thank you.
You know, Andrew, maybe our next session could be to kind of map some of these things out through the systems map.
Yeah,
that might be kind of fun, because I know we have a lot of factors that are hitting us here. So maybe we could do some systems mapping next time and start to pose some solutions for each of those little bubbles.
I want to mention that if he wants to know information about Sonoma County, I have the website that, as you know, he can go into and see what all the players are. Homelessaction.net.
Homelessaction, okay.
Sounds good. All right, everybody. Oh, sorry.
Sorry. Can we get our county representatives? I see Jenna's here from
Jenna
Rohnert
is
Park.
here from the city.
Garcia.
Yes, Jenna is here from the city of Rohnert Park.
Can we corral influential individuals from our county into this?
We did have some folks register to be here from the CDC tonight, and we'll make sure they get the recording link.
Great. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
Well, yeah, Senator, thank you, Rebecca. Yeah, thank you for that too. So let's commit to a save the date. And it seems like Wednesday night seems to work for folks. And so I'm going to get, Andrew is the proud father of a brand new infant. So we work around that piece a little bit too. So, and he's doing a lot of presenting right now. So we'll get a date, and you all are on the list, and you'll get the information, and we will reschedule.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Happy to come back and talk more. Yeah. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thanks,
Teddie, a shout out to you, Teddie. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thanks.
Yeah, this is really fun.
Teddie.
This is really fun, and we have a lot more plans. So we'll see you all in about a month or so.
Cool.
Nice work, Andrew.
And
Thank you. Good night.
Yes.
Good.
Thanks to my other partners.
All right, I'll talk to you soon.
See you later. Bye.
Bye.
Bye.